Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, was rich and powerful but chose to live a simple life. Why would a man who had everything give it all up? What was the secret and what lessons can we learn from his life? If you want to learn more about Stoic philosophy and how to live freely, not controlled by money or power, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let's learn from the valuable lessons in Seneca's life to change the way we look at life. He had everything: wealth, power, and the ear of an emperor. Seneca was not a forgotten philosopher scribbling in the shadows of Rome. No, he was one of the richest, most influential men of his time. He advised Emperor Nero himself, shaped political decisions, and controlled immense wealth that could rival kingdoms. And yet, he warned us not to depend on any of it. This is what makes Seneca different. He had the world, but he didn't trust it. While others clung to their titles and possessions as if they were permanent, Seneca looked them in the eye and called them illusions. He believed that true power was not in gold, nor in whispers to emperors but in self-mastery, in the quiet ability to remain steady when storms rise, in the freedom that comes not from owning more, but from needing less. He practiced what he preached. He rehearsed poverty, slept on the floor, fasted for days, not out of misery but out of preparation, so that if fortune turned he would not be broken, because he had trained for it, because he had already let go inside. Can you imagine that kind of strength? To sit at the center of power and still say, "None of this defines me." That is Stoicism, not a rejection of success but a mastery of it. Not fear of loss but peace with it. Seneca reminds us, the measure of a person is not what they hold in their hands, but what they can let go of without losing themselves. And maybe that's the secret. Not to chase more, but to become more. He slept on the floor, while his palace had silk sheets. Seneca lived in luxury. Gold adorned his halls. Servants waited at his every command. The world saw a man at the peak of Roman power. But inside, Seneca was doing something the world couldn't see. He was training for loss. Because he knew the truth: everything can vanish. Wealth, comfort, reputation. It all rests on fragile ground. And so, while others clung to comfort, Seneca practiced letting go. He called it voluntary discomfort. Once a month he would strip his life down to nothing. He wore rough clothes, slept without a bed, ate the simplest food. And while doing so he asked himself, is this what I feared? You see, fear loses its grip when you face it on your own terms. That's what Seneca understood. By choosing discomfort before it chose him, he took its power away. Where others were enslaved by luxury, he was free. It wasn't about punishing himself. It was about sharpening the blade of his spirit, preparing his mind for a world that can change overnight. Because one day it will. And when that day comes, it won't be the wealthy who endure, it will be the prepared. Seneca's life was a paradox, surrounded by comfort, yet constantly stepping away from it. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. That's strength. That's discipline. That's freedom. What if, just once a month, you lived without the things you think you need? Not to suffer, but to remember how strong you really are. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult. That's what Seneca believed. And he didn't just say it, he lived it. In a world where people waited for the right moment, Seneca called them out. He saw the hesitation, the doubt, the quiet surrender disguised as patience. And he knew the truth. The obstacle isn't out there. It's in here, in the mind. We don't act because we fear the unknown. We tell ourselves stories: I'm not ready. It's too risky. What if I fail? But Seneca turns the mirror back on us. Maybe the challenge isn't the mountain but our refusal to climb. He believed that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the refusal to be ruled by it. Every day you wait, the fear grows stronger. But every time you act, the fear loses ground. Seneca's life wasn't easy. He was exiled, threatened, betrayed. Yet he kept writing, teaching, leading. Not because it was easy, but because he refused to bow to difficulty. His words remind us, our mind shapes our reality. If we see the world as impossible, it becomes so. But if we dare, just once, to step forward despite the fear, doors open. So the question isn't, can I do this? It's, will I dare to try? Because life won't wait for you to feel ready. And courage isn't something you find. It's something you choose. He owned great wealth, but it never owned him. In a city obsessed with status, gold, and applause, Seneca stood apart. Yes, he had riches. Yes, he had power. But his real wealth was something deeper, the ability to walk away from it all without flinching. Because Seneca understood a dangerous truth. What you possess can end up possessing you. He watched as others were ruled by their coins, their titles, their fear of public opinion. They weren't living, they were performing, constantly chasing approval, terrified of losing what they had. But not Seneca. He saw money for what it was, a tool, not a master, a resource, not a reason for being. And power? Influence? He used them but never clung to them. Because he trained himself every day to be ruled only by reason, not desire. By character, not comfort. By values, not vanity. The crowd praised him, he stayed steady. The crowd mocked him, still steady. Praise and insult, gain and loss, none of it touched who he truly was. That is rare. That is strength. You can't be free if your happiness depends on things you can't control. Seneca knew that. So he built his foundation inside, where no thief, no emperor, no opinion could reach. What about you? Would you still be you without the title? Without the car, the likes, the praise? Because that's where your power begins. Not in what you have, but in what you could lose, and still remain whole. Imagine losing everything. Your home, your fortune, your status, the people you love. Most would shudder at the thought. But Seneca? He embraced it, not out of pessimism but out of preparation. He believed that true strength lies in readiness. Not in pretending bad things won't happen, but in training your mind for when they do. Because loss is not a question of if, but when. And when that moment comes, the only thing that will hold you together is what you've built within. Seneca practiced this every day. In quiet moments he would imagine disaster, not to torment himself but to soften the blow. He pictured exile, poverty, illness, death. He called it premeditation of adversity. To others this seemed grim. But to Seneca it was freedom. When you've already faced the worst in your mind, the world can no longer surprise you. You stop living in fear of what might be taken. You start living with gratitude for what still remains. This isn't about living in anxiety. It's about building resilience. It's about telling your mind, I can lose everything, and still not lose myself. Seneca taught that fortune is borrowed, not owned. One day life will collect its debt. Will you collapse when that day comes, or will you stand? The time to prepare is not when the storm arrives. It's when the skies are still blue. So today, while you have comfort, peace, love, dare to imagine their absence. And ask yourself, if I lost it all, would I still be me? To live well, you must learn how to die. That was Seneca's belief. Not out of despair but out of clarity. He didn't run from death. He didn't dress it up in euphemisms or avoid the conversation. He looked it straight in the eye, and welcomed it as a teacher. Because the moment you accept that life is fleeting, you start living it fully. Seneca wrote, death is not an evil. What is an evil is the fear of it. To him, death wasn't a curse to be feared, but a fact to be faced. A natural part of the cycle. Just as night follows day, so too does death follow life. And fearing it changes nothing, except that it robs you of peace now. That's what he saw. People clinging to life so tightly that they forgot to actually live. Obsessed with extending time, they wasted the time they had. But not Seneca. He believed that every day should be lived as if it were borrowed, because it is. And when you stop fearing death, you begin to make bold choices. You speak your truth. You stop waiting. You stop pretending. Because you know this ride doesn't last forever. Seneca didn't fear death. He feared never having lived. He saw life as a gift, and death as the return of that gift. Nothing more. Nothing less. So ask yourself, if today were your last day, would you be proud of how you lived it? Because death isn't the enemy. Wasting your life is. He walked among vipers, but refused to grow fangs. Seneca lived in a world of sharp edges. The Roman court was not a place of honor, it was a game of survival. Lies, ambition, betrayal, these weren't exceptions, they were the rules. And yet, in the middle of it all, Seneca chose something different. Integrity. While others schemed, he stayed grounded. While others twisted truth to climb higher, Seneca chose to stand still, if it meant standing tall. It wasn't because it was easy. It was because it was right. He believed that virtue wasn't something you practice when it's safe. It's something you cling to when everything around you tempts you to let go. Character, he taught, is who you are when no one is watching. And in the depths of Rome's darkest politics, Seneca held the line. He wasn't perfect. He made compromises. He struggled. But he never let the world steal the core of who he was. He knew, you can't control the actions of others, but you can control your response. He lived by one principle. Live in such a way that your soul is never for sale. In a world where values are often traded for advantage, Seneca reminds us, there's power in staying true. There's strength in restraint. There's peace in living without a mask. So ask yourself, when pressure mounts, when no one's watching, when shortcuts tempt you, will you still choose the harder road, the honest one? Because in the end your reputation fades. Your titles vanish. But your integrity? That's yours forever. He didn't just write letters. He wrote lifelines. In quiet moments between political storms and personal trials, Seneca picked up his pen, not to boast but to remind. He wrote to his friends not of conquest or glory, but of impermanence, of gratitude, of what truly matters. He spoke of time as a fragile gift, of fortune as a flickering flame. And above all he urged them, and us, to live while we still can. His letters weren't sermons. They were conversations. Honest, raw, human. He would say things like, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." He wasn't scolding. He was inviting us to wake up, to notice the beauty in the ordinary, to stop chasing what fades, to root ourselves in what lasts. He reminded his friends that nothing is promised. Not wealth, not health, not even tomorrow. But from that truth comes power, not fear. Because once we accept that all is fleeting, we learn to hold life gently and to love it fiercely. Seneca's letters were seeds. And centuries later they're still blooming. Because wisdom written from the heart never expires. And maybe that's what made Seneca timeless, not just his brilliance but his compassion. His need to pass the torch. To leave behind not a legacy of power but a map for the soul. So if you could write one letter today, to someone you love, to someone who's drifting, to your future self, what would you say? Because words endure. And sometimes one letter can change a life. They gave him poison, but they couldn't touch his peace. When the order came for Seneca to die, he didn't beg. He didn't hide. He didn't rage at the injustice. He simply opened his veins. The most powerful empire in the world accused him, condemned him, and forced him into suicide. But in that final moment, Rome witnessed something it could not destroy. A man completely at peace with himself. Seneca had spent a lifetime preparing for this. Not for death itself, but for the moment of death. The moment when philosophy is no longer just words, but breath and blood and silence. He called on friends. He comforted them. He spoke calmly with clarity. Even as his life slipped away, he remained the teacher. Because this is what he believed. That death is not a punishment, it is a return. That fear gives it power, but acceptance gives it grace. And so, he met his end the way he lived his life, deliberately, consciously, with dignity. Not because he was fearless, but because he had trained for this exact moment his entire life. He reminded us that the true test of a life well lived is not how it begins, but how it ends. Seneca didn't just speak of virtue, he became it. He didn't just write of courage, he embodied it. So ask yourself, if death knocked today, would you tremble? Or would you greet it like an old friend? Because the Stoic path isn't about escaping death. It's about earning your peace with it. And Seneca earned his. With every choice, every word, every breath. He lived in luxury but never let it own him. Seneca's life is a testament to something many never grasp. That true freedom doesn't come from the world around you, it comes from within. He lived in Rome's finest homes, dined on its richest feasts, and wore the robes of a man with influence. The wealth of the empire was at his feet. But Seneca knew a secret. Possessions don't define you. Your mind does. He taught that freedom isn't about escaping your circumstances. It's about mastering your reactions to them. You can live in a palace, but if you let wealth and status control your soul, you're not free, you're a prisoner. Seneca's freedom wasn't in what he had, it was in what he refused to need. He proved that the real measure of wealth is not what you own, but what you can walk away from without losing yourself. So many chase riches and titles, hoping they will bring peace. But Seneca reminds us, peace doesn't come from having everything, it comes from needing nothing. To live in the world without being owned by it, that is the true definition of freedom. Seneca showed us that self-mastery is the ultimate wealth. That true strength is not in holding tight to what we have, but in the ability to let go without fear. So, today, whether you have much or little, ask yourself, am I free? Because freedom isn't a prize to be won. It's a practice to be lived. Thank you for watching. Seneca's life teaches us that inner freedom is what matters most, not power or wealth. Share your thoughts and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next lessons on Stoic philosophy.